Hey, welcome everyone to another edition of the MSP Mastered webinar series. My name's Erick Simpson, a former MSP, and I want to appreciate all of you joining me today for about 60 minutes in helping work on the business rather than in the business. I'm excited for today's webinar because it is a topic that we have not talked about on the webinar series yet. And it's the 99% of MSPs missing a critical security gap that allows them to, I'm going to drop this extra word in there, remotely protect clients at the BIOS firmware level. Now, I'm a recovering MSP, right? I was in the enterprise. I ran an MSP practice for a few years, sold that practice, and then started working with MSPs like yourselves. And I had a basic understanding of BIOS and the role that it plays in security. But, in my experience, it wasn't something that we wanted to flash or update or do anything remotely, right? Because it's so critical. But today we're going to talk about a solution that allows us to do just that. And before we get into the conversation and I invite my special guests on, I have a quick poll for you. So I'm launching the poll now. Answer this question for us, please. Do you have a simple, efficient way today to remotely, the keyword here is remotely, secure, configure, and update BIOS firmware regardless of manufacturer? So I'll let you percolate on that for a few seconds. And again, this is one of those areas that hackers now see as an opportunistic attack point for systems. We're typically securing applications, operating systems, services, and things like that, right? Now these hackers are attacking the BIOS at the BIOS level, right? It's kind of the hardware level of the machine. So how do we guard against that? That's what our conversation is going to be about today. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And while I do that, I'm going to invite on my special guests, Amit Dillon and Rob Inman from Phoenix Technologies. Welcome, team.
Hey, Eric. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Amit and Rob. Really appreciate you helping us out understanding this opportunity. And can you see these results? 78% of the respondents say they do not have a solution to patch, update, and configure BIOS firmware remotely. Is that surprising to you?
Yeah, I'd be curious to know the 22% that do, exactly what they do, and perhaps at the end of this, they'll realize that there are some things they're not doing.
Yeah, we might be chatting them a little bit later. But before we jump into today's conversation, a little fireside chat. Yep. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Amit, and what you do, sure, and a little bit about Phoenix and FirmGuard.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Amit Dillon, the VP of Marketing here at Phoenix Technologies, and really excited today to talk about this product we have called FirmGuard, which obviously is related to BIOS firmware. I've been working on that pretty much from its inception in various forms. So definitely excited to talk about it.
Well, welcome, Amit. Rob, tell us a little about yourself and what you do at Phoenix.
So thank you, Eric. So my name is Rob Inman. I'm the Director of Product for the FirmGuard product at Phoenix. My background actually come from the MSP world. Also have done some SaaS sales. So, I kind of know the industry a little bit, and that's actually where I've been able to input a lot of, good feedback to FirmGuard as far as when it comes to MSPs.
Yeah, that's super valuable, right? Seeing it from both sides of the channel, right? Understanding what MSPs, need and what they do and how they operate, and then helping shape solutions to help them address the needs of their clients. Appreciate having you both on. So let's chat a little bit about what we're going to talk about. Let's frame it up a little bit. So, like I said in my introduction, I have an understanding of what BIOS firmware is, but why don't we define it specifically for today's conversation? Amit, why don't you take us through kind of your definition of BIOS firmware? I mean, and why that is an attractive target for cyber criminals today.
Yeah, so let me just give you a very simple definition of BIOS firmware. So the way I like to think about it is when you hit the on button on your favorite laptop, PC, server, whatever it may be, the very first piece of software that comes up is the BIOS firmware. And that comes up prior to the OS. It's pre-OS. In fact, it's the BIOS firmware that launches the operating system. And that's a real key thing to understand because you can imagine if as a hacker you're able to somehow infiltrate the BIOS firmware, and we'll talk about ways that that's done throughout the next hour. Well, you can launch any operating system you want, and you're going to operate, obviously launch some sort of rogue operating system, and at that point you have complete control of the endpoint. You can do whatever you want. And clearly, that's not a situation that anybody wants to be in.
Right, right. So Rob, why is BIOS firmware such a big, attack surface? And why should MSPs care? I mean, that's typically something that, you need very specific access to. So what are the entry points and why is it so important for MSPs now to really focus on this? And why are, multiple questions, right? Why are so few MSPs addressing it?
So I think historically, to access the BIOS, you have to have physical access to the machine, right? You have to be in front of the machine, reboot it, figure out what the right F key is. Everyone has a different F key, so that you can get into the BIOS, get it done in time, so you can get into the BIOS. So at least I remember back when I was in with my MSP, the BIOS was something that was so difficult to get at that it was really not worth thinking about because I was not going to dispatch a technician to go on site just to change a BIOS setting on a machine. So it's remained that area that's kind of been in the dark as far as, it's not worth getting into. It's not worth going and actually accessing it. So I just kind of leave it forgotten. But that does not get ignored by anyone that's looking for a way into the machine that's not being actively watched. So with the FirmGuard product, which is what we're going to be talking about today, that gives you that remote access into the BIOS where now you can do it from a portal instead of having to physically be in front of every single machine. So that opens up a lot more that you can do as far as security on that machine in a way that makes sense time-wise, tech-wise, and even money-wise to the business, to the MSP business.
And
Makes a lot of, I'm sorry, I was just going to comment. It
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, right? Because you don't want to roll trucks all the time because that's really expensive and costly for MSPs. Amit, you had something to add?
I was going to say that a key thing here is that the industry has spent a lot of time on, and justifiably so, on protecting the operating system and applications and so forth. And so if you're a hacker, right, and you start getting cut off from some of those avenues, you naturally look at other ways to exploit an endpoint. And so that's, I think, one reason why we're starting to see more BIOS-related exploits because they're getting shut off at those higher layers. So, all right, let's go to a lower layer.
So when I launched the poll, I said, do you have a way to, I asked the audience, do you have a way to manage the BIOS firmware remotely, regardless of manufacturer? So that I would assume that there's some sort of a standard for BIOS firmware, Amit. Would that be fair to say?
There is, yeah. It's called UEFI, or some people call it UEFI, and it stands for Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. So you can forget all about that, but you're going to hear us talk a lot about UEFI BIOS firmware. Just know that we're talking about the modern standard for it. But one thing I will mention is, and we'll get into this, is you'd be surprised at the number of endpoints that are out there in the wild that are not using the modern standard. And that's one thing that FirmGuard helps to identify. If you've got an endpoint that's old, it's called legacy mode.
And I would assume that if there's something that we're trying to manage and support that doesn't align with a standard, it makes it more difficult typically to manage it. So you guys have solved for that, it sounds like.
Well, actually, our recommendation, and it's not just us, but even auditors or other folks will tell you, you should take that endpoint out of circulation. Because if it doesn't support the modern UEFI standard, which has been around for nearly 20 years at this point, it's an old machine. And so, as an MSP, you really don't want your clients using, 10-year-old machines that are, vulnerable.
So audience, text me in the chat with an exclamation point if you have machines in your clients' locations that are older than 10 years old. Hit me with an exclamation point in the chat. Rob, let me jump to you now, and I just want to see all these exclamation points pop
I'm
up.
curious to see this too. Yeah.
Don't be shy, everybody. We know. Um, so what qualifies Phoenix to deliver this solution, and why is it so unique, Rob?
Well, Phoenix, for those that don't know,
Right.
Phoenix has been around for a while. We've been around for over 40 years. We were actually the first company to clone the IBM BIOS that IBM was using for, well, I should say legally clone, because I think Compaq had the first copy that they made. But that's an interesting story as an aside. But we've been doing BIOS for over 40 years. I mean, that's who Phoenix is. So we've, over the past, I think, 3 or 4 years now, we've had some engineers working on the FirmGuard product. And these are people that's what they do. They know BIOS, you know. Phoenix itself is part of the UEFI Alliance, one of the founding members of the UEFI Alliance. You know, so we've been in that space for a while.
Yeah, and that's how I know Phoenix BIOS, because, you know, I mean, I cut my teeth in the enterprise with, you know, Windows 3.1 and you know, those types of technologies, and it was always, you know, you had to optimize memory and you know, in these BIOSes where there were several, but I remember Phoenix being, you know, one of the leading.
If you were building PCs in the 80s, 90s, or even early 2000s, you almost couldn't avoid it. You were going to see Phoenix come up on that splash screen.
Yeah, thanks for aging me there. I mean, I appreciate that. So, hey, so hit me with a capital A in the chat, everybody. If you were building boxes back in the early days like I was, hit me with a capital A and let's talk. So let's talk about, you know, pivoting the conversation now. I mean, you've got a couple of slides that are going to help us visualize kind of exactly what we're talking about, the challenge, the opportunity, the solution. And then Rob, I can't wait for your demo of exactly how the platform works and makes it easy for MSPs to remotely manage and configure and update BIOS without worrying about, you know, not being in front of the machine and booting it manually. Cool. Go ahead, Amit.
All right, so hopefully everybody can see the slides here. So yeah, before Rob does the demo, just sort of give everybody a little bit of background. So I want to start here with, you know, if I would encourage everybody who's on the call right now to go to your favorite browser and type in firmguard.com/MSPM for obviously MSP mastered. And you'll see this free secure check audit that we offer. And it's a limited time offer, so you know, encourage you to sign up right away. It's absolutely no cost. And I want to emphasize that it's not just an evaluation of FirmGuard. I mean, it is that we'll provide every single feature that we're going to talk about today, unfettered for you to use and see. But it's more than an evaluation. It's actually something that you can use essentially as a prospecting tool. So you can take FirmGuard, you know, via the secure check audit, and you can deploy it on as many client machines as you want. You can put it across your entire, you know, all your clients if you'd like. And the interesting thing is you're going to get actionable information back, right? So we talked about legacy mode, right? So you will see in the FirmGuard dashboard exactly which clients, which endpoints within a given client have old machines that are in legacy mode. And obviously you can then use that to recommend that they replace those very specific machines. Another thing, you know, that you know, we've been doing this for quite a while, and you know, so we've collected a lot of stats on this. You're going to notice that you're going to have an awful lot of endpoints that don't have the latest BIOS firmware. And we're going to tell you the very specific machines that don't. And just to give you an idea, in the secure check audits that we've been doing for quite a bit of time, we've seen up to 25% of a given client's endpoints not have the latest firmware, which is really just a problem waiting to happen. And of course, FirmGuard is going to give you a mechanism to update that as well. So again, encourage everybody to go to firmguard.com/MSPM and sign up right away. Yeah, not going to cost you anything.
Yeah, appreciate that. And it sounds like obviously a security opportunity, but also a revenue opportunity for MSPs.
100%. That's why I emphasize that, you're going to be able to evaluate the product, but more importantly, or equally importantly, you're going to find actionable information that you can then engage in a conversation with your clients. Okay, so we talk about the fact that and maybe this isn't a true stat, but the idea being is that the vast majority of MSPs don't really think about BIOS firmware and protecting it for the reasons that Rob talked about earlier. And so again, just to sort of reiterate, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, but as I say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. The BIOS firmware, the UEFI BIOS firmware, again, UEFI being the standard, is pre-OS. It is the very first piece of software that comes up when you hit the on button, and it comes up, it surveys the hardware, makes sure everything is sane, and then it actually launches the OS. And so therein lies the problem, right? So if you're able to, as this hacker here is doing, take over or in some way compromise the UEFI BIOS firmware, you can launch whatever OS you want. And obviously that's not a situation you want to be in. So this is a question that I get a lot from folks. They're like, okay, yeah, you've been telling me about BIOS firmware and this, that, and the other. Well, I've never heard of any of these attacks, right? So give me an idea of what kind of attacks are we talking about here? So if you go to firmguard.com/security notifications, the URL at the bottom here, that's give you a comprehensive list of all the various attacks. But I've just put a few here, over the last couple of years to give people a sense of what they're about. And, they go by interesting names like PK fail, logo fail, Black Lotus, Cosmic Strand. I'm not exactly sure who names these, but what I can assure you is the names may sound funny, but they're not a laughing matter. If any of your endpoints or your client's endpoints get infected with these this malware, it's not a situation you want to be in. And I won't go through these in detail. We could spend hours doing that, but I want to point out one sort of key vector of attack that a large number of these use, Black Lotus, for example, which is there's this mechanism within UEFI firmware that's called secure boot. And don't worry about what that is. Rob will talk about it a little bit during the demo, but simply put, secure boot is a mechanism that's in UEFI firmware to make sure that only an authentic or an authenticated version of the operating system, Windows, for example, can launch. So it's a cryptographic method to make sure that a hacker can't launch a rogue operating system. So you can imagine if you're a hacker and you've got malware, well, what are you probably going to try and do? You're going to try and disable secure boot so you can launch that rogue operating system. So a large percentage of these attacks attempt to do exactly that, disable secure boot. And you will see during our demo, that's a key thing that FirmGuard will alert you on right away. So again, with the secure check audit that we've been talking about, you're going to know right away, for a given client, how many of their endpoints have secure boot disabled. And just to give you an idea, we've seen up to 20% of endpoints on a given client. This is based upon audits we've been doing for a long time, not have secure boot enabled. Now, that's not necessarily always because of malware. It could just be something's misconfigured or what have you, but that's equally bad. So bottom line is FirmGuard's going to tell you, hey, you've got these number of clients that have secure boot enabled, and we're going to provide you a mechanism to make sure that is enabled. So that's a key way that FirmGuard will help you secure your BIOS. Okay, so it's one thing for me to sit here and tell you how bad it is and show you all these things, but it's not just me that's saying it. I think this is about as big a sort of a clarion call as you'll ever hear. This is coming straight from the U.S. government, from CISA, the Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency. I'm sure you're all very familiar with them. And this, came out about a year and a half or so ago. And I'll just read this statement to you because I think it's extremely powerful and gives you a sense of how serious a problem that we're talking about here. So adversaries have demonstrated that they already know how to exploit UEFI components for persistence, and they will only get better with practice. Essentially, what the US government is saying to all the IT professionals out there, including, of course, all the MSPs that are on the call today, is the bad guys, the hackers, the adversaries, they're coming. They're going to use UEFI as a way to infiltrate, so you better be prepared. I couldn't have said it better myself. Would encourage people, go to the blog post here. You can see the URL and read it for yourself. But very, very serious threat. Okay, so talked about the sort of the background of attack vectors and so forth. Let me spend a moment just sort of orienting you around the product. And again, Rob's going to go through each of these in detail, so you'll really be able to see it in action. But FirmGuard, it's got a suite of features. There's 6 of them that are available right now, and we're constantly delivering more. And the nomenclature is they all essentially begin with the word secure. So secure check, secure config, secure update, secure wipe. When you hear me use those terms, just know, oh, okay, he's talking about a FirmGuard feature. And so, starting from the top, secure check, we call it our secure check audit for a reason, because it's oriented around BIOS firmware security. So that's what secure check is focused on. Secure config, as the name implies, is focused on remote BIOS configuration. So being able to remotely configure various BIOS settings without having to actually go to the endpoint. Secure update, pretty obvious, remotely update your BIOS. Secure wipe, this is an interesting one. So this is the ability to remotely erase, forensically erase an endpoint drive, hard disk, or what have you. Something that you might want to do if you want to recycle a machine or donate it, or just take it out of commission. And then secure sense and secure beat sort of round out the features. And so let me take a second. We just talked about secure config as being one of 6 features that we've got right now. This is a live use case. It comes from a existing customer of ours, company called Healthy Technology Solutions, located out in Las Vegas. They've been using FirmGuard for quite a while. And this gentleman, Ben Gilbertson, this is a direct quote from him, which I'll read to you. He says, in a matter of 15 minutes, what we thought was going to be a headache turned out to be something simple, thanks to FirmGuard Secure Config. So what was the issue here? So it was actually quite straightforward. So it was a situation where Ben and his team just needed to bring 2 new endpoints online for a client. The rub was that client happened to be in Asia, so some 13 time zones away, and they ran into a problem. And that problem was that they needed to enable BitLocker on these endpoints, but they couldn't without going in and changing a BIOS setting. Specifically, the setting was TPM device status. They needed to just make that available. Not a very difficult thing to do if you're in front of the machine and you can get into the BIOS. But of course, this is 13 time zones away. So obviously, Ben and his team couldn't get in front of the machine. And so the only alternative they had, if they didn't have FirmGuard, was to try and get the client online on a Zoom session or something, and talk a client through actually changing BIOS settings on an endpoint. And you can imagine how painful that is. I'm quite sure MSPs that are on the call have had this experience. It is tremendously frustrating, inefficient. Takes a ton of time, and so that's why Ben says, hey, it took me 15 minutes. He remoted into the machine from using FirmGuard, went to secure config, made the change, rebooted, BitLocker came up, off you go. So just a very concrete example of technician efficiency. And we could talk about many other examples, and we've got some MSPs they're going to be talking here in a bit. They may relate an example or two as well.
Yeah, that's a great save right there. I see Larry in the chats like, now that is cool. That is cool. Yeah, excellent.
Absolutely. And so I'll sort of wind up with we're all here, and you're probably wondering, well, okay, this sounds good, but what are the benefits that I can expect from FirmGuard? And so there's sort of 3 buckets, so to speak, that we sort of classify them in. The first is the one that we've been talking about the most here, obviously security and compliance, right? So with FirmGuard, you immediately close the BIOS firmware security gap. So it's that 1/3 of the stack that I talked about earlier that's left exposed. You immediately close that. And so that has knock-on effects from a compliance perspective. And one thing that we're starting to see quite a bit with our MSP customers that are coming on board, and Jesse, who's on the call a little bit later, he can talk to this, is auditors now, compliance auditors are starting to identify BIOS as an area that needs to be secured. And so it's just a matter of time before this just becomes a standard thing. And so if you want to keep your clients in compliance with NIST, ISO, CMMC, those sorts of things, you're going to have something like this. And obviously, that could potentially reduce your your client's cyber insurance bill as well, because again, you're closing that gap. So that's one concrete benefit: security and compliance. But it doesn't end there. The second bucket, so to speak, from a benefits perspective, is technician efficiency. And I think the secure config example that we just gave of changing the TPM setting is one of many examples of that. But it's not just configuration, right? We talked about secure wipe, so the ability to remotely wipe a drive. Saves you a truck roll. Or not even a truck roll, perhaps. It saves you from having to send PCs back and forth in the mail, to wipe them. Secure update, that's obvious, right? If you can remotely update the BIOS and keep it current without, ever leaving your seat, so to speak, well, that's clearly a technician efficiency benefit. And then finally, and maybe I should have had this one first, because this is the one, we ultimately are all running businesses here, so perhaps the one you care about the most is, so how can I make some money off of this, right? How can I increase my MRR with FirmGuard? And the answer is actually remarkably simple. And again, the panelists can talk to this. I'm sure every MSP on the call here today offers some sort of security suite, so EDR type of thing to protect the operating system and application layer. But again, probably you have nothing down at the BIOS firmware level. And so by deploying FirmGuard, you can charge an uplift because now you're guarding that 1/3 of the stack that's been ignored to date. And then there's some other ways with secure wipe and so forth. But I think we've found our customers, the biggest thing that they've done from an MRR perspective is really lumping this into an uplift to their security package.
Those are three concrete benefits that I know our audience is perked up to. So excited to see the demo. Rob, can we queue you up?
Absolutely. Go ahead and take it over, Rob.
Awesome. Thanks, Amit. That was great.
All right. So thank you, Amit, for talking about that. And so here we're going to go over some of those features that Amit talked about and give you kind of a quick run through on what to expect when you log into the FirmGuard dashboard, which is what we're looking at here. This is the FirmGuard dashboard. And we see a couple of things here in the endpoint health widget that Amit referenced. So for example, secure boot being disabled or legacy boot being enabled. Now, we also talked before on the fireside chat, BIOS historically has been something that's been a little more difficult to have access to. So, chances are most programs like RMMs, things like that, won't tell you about things like secure boot because the fix is you have to roll a truck to have a technician on site and change those BIOS settings. So our goal here is to give you that easy bridge to be able to go in and fix these issues in a way that makes sense. That's easy to do. So for example, here I see I have 2 machines where secure boot is disabled. I can click on that. It gives me a list of my 2 machines. Now I can pop into one of these machines and use what we call secure config, which is our configuration tool for the BIOS. So here I have access to that Dell's BIOS right from here. I mean, I can expand some of these. I can show you some of the features that they have. In this case, we came here because of that particular issue that I know is under boot configuration, but I do like to show off my search. So I can do a search for secure. It automatically expands wherever it finds it. So in this case, we have enable secure boot, which is not checked on this machine. So this machine is not using secure boot. So what I can do here is I can check it and then save that. Now, whenever we do make BIOS edits, we need to make sure that the machine gets rebooted in order for those to be applied. So we have a couple ways that we can do that. As you can see, I can do this immediately if I feel this is something urgent that we want to take care of and reboot that machine immediately. Or the other option is I can schedule it out. So if I wanted to say, do this at 6:30 p.m., so I'm not interrupting that user's workflow during his workday, I can schedule that out. And that way, that'll be changed. It'll be rebooted at 6:30. And then when it comes back online, whatever settings you had set here will be maintained on that machine, and now you'll have those settings. Now, while I'm here, as long as we're talking about editing the BIOS, some of the other things, because I like to give people ideas, because I know, you know, if I go back various years, this is something that I really wouldn't have given it much thought, because again, it's not anything that I was going to be able to deploy in mass or just come out here and say, yeah, I want to do this on machines in a way that would make sense time-wise. So like some of the things that I hear from our current partners, things that they like doing, for example, wake on LAN. So if I scroll down here, wake on LAN, if it's disabled on a machine, well, then at least for when I was with my MSP, it was never going to be woken up because it was disabled. I wasn't going to take the time to actually go onto that machine and turn it on. But now with FirmGuard, I can pop in here and then choose the wake on LAN setting that I want. And then, like I did before, save it, reboot the machine, and then go on my merry way. And now that machine should have wake on LAN enabled from then on. Another one that Amit mentioned was that issue with the TPM chip for that BitLocker deployment. And this is something, again, we doing the BitLocker deployment. Historically, if that would have been having to send someone on site, that would have been a problem to have to go to Asia. So again, we can do a search for TPM. Here's my TPM 2.0 security, and it is sure enough unchecked. So they were able to check this, reboot the machines, and continue that BitLocker deployment. And one of the last things that I like to show here when we're talking about the BIOS is, again, just kind of to give you an idea of, there's a lot of settings. I mean, if we start going over here and opening all these things, there's a lot of different settings that we have access to. One of them is the USB ports on the machines, right? So I've had to break into various machines in my professional IT career. I'd have my little USB stick with Linux on it, and I could, boot into that, and I'd have tools available to do various things, which could be a loophole depending on the security that you want to have on these machines. Most BIOSes have a setting for enable USB boot support. So if you just go in there and uncheck that, they won't be able to boot from any external USB devices and bypass all of that Windows security that you put in there for a reason. So that's just one of the last things that I like to show. Again, I've had partners that go in here and find different settings, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize. And then they go in and they just start setting them for them. So it really makes you change that idea of what your security stance is going to be, because now you have access to more. And not only that, but one of the things that my partners really like to talk about is, especially when they're prospecting, they're going in and they're talking to other customers, trying to make them see the light of why that MSP is the best MSP to go with. And one thing that they can go with is the fact that they're protecting their customers not only within Windows, which most MSPs do, right? I would say every MSP. They'll protect them within Windows. You'll have your security stack, you'll have your RMM tool installed, so you'll be able to protect them within Windows. But the moment that power button gets pressed and the BIOS boots up, and you have access to change those settings on the BIOS, now you can let them know that you are also protecting them pre-OS load, like from the second that power button gets pushed. And that gives you some sort of differentiation between everyone else that's out there, right? So you can say that you're doing things that are a little different than everyone else. So that was basically some of the settings that you can change at the BIOS level. The next feature that I want to talk on that Amit touched on is Secure Wipe. Now, Secure Wipe is really more of a compliance feature, right? So in this case, Well, let me talk about, let's say, a doctor's office that has to maintain HIPAA compliance. So when their machines get old, they need to be replaced. And now we need to make sure that the data that's on there, the patient data, is being completely removed. Historically, again, this is something I used to do, have a technician go on site, pull the hard drive from the machines, or bring the whole machine back into the office, and then destroy the hard drive, right? We used to drill the hard drives out. I've seen people have shredders. I've actually seen some people take the hard drives to the target practice range. So, various different methods to make sure that that data is completely gone. But here what we can do is we can select a drive and then click wipe drive. And now we have access to different methods of wiping the drive. Now, because we are working here at the hardware level, we can see the hardware wipes that this particular device supports. So we can make sure that the method that we're using is supported by the drive. We also have OS wipes available. So if you do need something like a DoD level wipe, we have that available. We also have some international versions, British, Canadian, German. So you can choose the wipe that's going to make sure that the drive is wiped, again, to maintain the compliance for that customer. And then after that, what you'll have access to is this certificate of erasure. And this is what an auditor's going to want to see to make sure that the machine has all that data removed. So having the certificate of erasure allows you to tell your client that, yes, all the data is gone, they can still maintain the compliance, and you have that certificate of erasure for as many machines as you wiped to prove that that machine stays within compliance. Now, once this is done, what you can do is you can tell that client that, hey, now they can do whatever they want with those machines, right? They've been sanitized. They can donate them for tax reasons, and get a tax write-off off of them. So again, they can do whatever they want with that. So, it's just a handy feature that you can use. And that partner that I was actually talking about, they were doing this and, charging for it, of course. When they switched over to Secure Wipe, one of the things they were able to do was lower the price of their service, but because the cost also went down. I mean, you just saw me go through, the steps needed to do the wipe. Because the cost went down, even though he lowered the price, he was actually able to make more money per wipe using FirmGuard. And it was a lot easier to do. He didn't, again, have to use a technician to go on site and do all of these things. So that's kind of how our partners are using Secure Wipe. Let me go back to the dashboard. I'm going to touch on Legacy Boot, which Amit mentioned. If I come in here and I see that a machine is booting in legacy mode, if I take a look at the information here that SecureSense has given me, this machine is running Windows 10. And it really doesn't raise any red flags if I see this in an RMM. And that's what the RMM is going to tell me, that it's running Windows 10. I mean, I may not like that it's running home, but Windows 10 is not going to raise any red flags like it's running Windows XP or an outdated OS or anything like that. But here I'm told that that OS was installed in legacy mode, which might as well be running an older OS. Chances are it's because the hardware doesn't support a modern OS, but this allows you to open up that conversation with your client and plan out a path that they can follow. So they can, you can say, hey, let's make sure that we put in the budget for next quarter some money so we can upgrade these machines. That way you're not kind of just dumping something on their laps that they need to do immediately because, you're in the middle of a project or something like that. So it gives them time to process it and be able to set that money aside. So what used to happen to me sometimes is client was being like, hey, I'll just go to Best Buy and pick up a couple laptops there. They would always buy the wrong types. So, this is a way that you can kind of control the process a little more. And again, opens up that communication with your clients, which is really nice. The last thing here I want to show is this firmware version out of date. So this is the BIOS out of date. I have 4 machines here, as you see. I have an Acer, an Asus, a Dell, HP. So we can pop in here. I can go into my secure update screen, and I can see that the version that's installed on this machine is .26. The latest known version is .36. So I can start an update just by clicking this button. And again, I have the same options to do it immediately or schedule it out. Or if I'm feeling brave that day, I could actually select all 4 machines and run a task and update all 4 BIOSes at once. Again, either immediately or schedule it out. But what I want to point out is the fact that we're updating 4 BIOSes from 4 different manufacturers. So it's kind of nice that you have one area that you can do that from. Now, I'll try to answer some questions that I always get asked before you start flooding the chat with it. So these updates are coming from the manufacturer, right? So we're not doing anything except giving you the ability to see which machines have an older version when there's a newer version available, and kind of just the vehicle to bring that capsule update to that machine. The capsule update is coming from the manufacturer, so whatever method they have for updating the BIOS, that's what that machine would be following. And of course, I would recommend to have the same care and attention that any of you would have when you're updating any sort of BIOS. Couple other questions that I'll cover. For example, the installation. So if we see here, of course, we have groups or companies or sites, however you want to call them. We call them groups, so you can spread out your machines amongst your different customers. And here you can also see the scripts that we provide for you to use your RMM to push out the agent that gets installed. It's a small agent. Again, it's communicating with the BIOS on that machine locally. And we have a PowerShell one, and we also have a command line if you want to do it that way. So that's how it gets installed using your RMM, and it is a small agent. It is Windows-based today, and we are hoping for a Linux one. I mean, we do have it on the roadmap. We're working on getting that out as soon as possible. There was a question about Apple devices. I answered that in the Q&A, so if you have a question about that, feel free to see my answer over there. And the other question that I do get a lot of is, does this only work on Phoenix BIOSes? So the answer to that is no. As you saw, we were in Dell's, HP's, Lenovo's, Acer's, Asus. However, I do want to mention that we have to be very careful about what we're doing in a BIOS, right? A BIOS can be kind of a scary place to mess around in. So with that in mind, the way that we have approached the ability to actually go in and edit the individual items within the BIOS. You notice up here we have referenced something called advanced features, which in this case are enabled. Those advanced features are basically all the BIOS settings. And the way we handle that is we test them in our lab first before we unlock those advanced features to make sure that we're getting the replies from the devices that we're expecting. So currently, we have unlocked and we're maintaining Dell's, HP's, and Lenovo's. So those have, the full access of the advanced features available right now. So those 3 manufacturers, they are the lion's share of the business machines that are installed out there. So most machines are going to be one of those 3 brands. But we are working on increasing that number over time as we get the machines in the labs and we test them out so that we can whitelist those as well. That's completely separate from Secure Wipe and Secure Update. As you saw, we did have other machines within the Secure Update, like the Acer and the Aces. But if I go into those machines and I go into Secure Config, you'll notice that it does say Advanced Features Unsupported. So in this case, I have some Wake on LAN options, power plant, and boot sequence options, and that's pretty much all I have for this machine. So, just full disclosure, we are working on increasing that number, but right now, those advanced features are available on the Dell's, HP's, and Lenovo's machines currently. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Amit. And I know we're going to be getting into the Q&A, so I just wanted to give you a taste of how FirmGuard works. You might have gotten some gears turning in your head, so we'll try to answer that all in the Q&A later on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rob. All right, Amit, you've invited a couple of partners to join us to give us kind of the, working in the business, real world, how does it impact their productivity? How do they position it, et cetera? Would you like to help me introduce them?
Absolutely. So these are 2 existing customers are coming online here. Aaron Semenek, who coincidentally, his MSP happens to be called Phoenix Technology. It has nothing to do with us. It's just a popular name. So we refer to Aaron's company as MSP Phoenix. And Jesse Judkins over at RQM Consulting. Again, they've been using FirmGuard for quite a while now. And so, they're here to relay some of their practical experiences with the product.
Well, welcome, Aaron and Jesse. Appreciate you joining us to give us kind of the the real world feel of how you're utilizing the product. Before we jump into some Q&A, Aaron, tell us a little bit about yourself and Phoenix Technology, Phoenix MSP, if you will, for today's conversation.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so I'm Aaron, and I own Phoenix Technology in Vancouver, Washington, not Arizona and not Canada. We've been since 35 years now, and we've been using FirmGuard for over a year. Successfully deployed quite a few clients with it. Have had great success. Have never had an issue with the product related to any ongoing or new issue problems.
Thanks for joining us again, Aaron. Jesse, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at RQM Consulting.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm Jesse Judkins. I'm the IT operations specialist here at RQM Consulting. We're a small MSP in Oklahoma City, and I'm kind of the glue between the tech and the people and the clients, and I'm just the glue. And FirmGuard definitely helps with my position. I think we also have had it for about a year, maybe a little bit more. I can't remember, but it's been a blast. It's in a category of its own as a tool. I have yet to find anything that overlaps even 50% with what it does. And it's because it's so new, it kind of unlocks some options that you did not know you had before. And that's, I think, my favorite part about it is just new options that were out of the question before just because they were not so feasible.
I recall, Jesse, you and I were chatting one time that I think when you first got FirmGuard, you were poking through secure config just to see, what kind of features that are available on these various machines. And I think you came upon a pretty unique use case, which is, hey, I got a new client, I inherited a bunch of new endpoints. Let me see what kind of features they support. And I think you found some ones that you weren't aware of before. I think it was the tamper resistance or something, if I recall.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned the secure check audit as a prospecting tool, because that's what I would view it as. I deployed it on a long-term client of ours. They have a pretty standard laptop base. They're all the same model. And they've had those laptops for half a decade. They're probably on the way out. In fact, we're going to refresh them soon. FirmGuard's going to be a part of that. But we've had them for so long, but until I installed FirmGuard, I did not know how many built-in security features they have that are not enabled by default. One of which, the most significant and I think cool as a techie person, was a feature called bottom cover tamper resistance, or something to that effect. Essentially, if somebody were to take the bottom cover off, do anything, and then put it back on, it would flip a switch. The next time you boot, it's going to make you enter the BIOS password, which is another thing that you can enable using FirmGuard. I thought that was really cool. And just recently, I actually proposed that to the client as part of their refresh. So I would definitely use this as an audit, sorry, not an audit tool, a prospecting tool, just to find those features. And then every little edge counts, especially if you're trying to replace an MSP. It would be nice to put FirmGuard on a few machines and say, hey, you've had these features the entire time. Why aren't they enabled? I mean, it's free security,
Yeah, it reminds me, Jesse, when I had my MSPs, like we always looked at the backups from a competing IT provider and always found fault there. This is kind of the same vein. It's like, oh, this is an easy way for you to demonstrate to the client where their existing provider is leaving gaps in their security posture, which is really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron, I got a question for you from your perspective. There's some questions that we've had during today's conversation here in the Q&A where attendees are saying, that's going to be a difficult conversation for me to have with a client. Like, how do I, and it's kind of the challenge that MSPs have, right? The cost of our tools and the things that we add to our stack continues to increase, but then getting the client to say yes to that increased bill can be awkward sometimes. So how do you position it, Aaron, when you're presenting to clients? Are you just coming out and just saying it's a, it's an extra fee? Are you rolling it into your existing portfolio? How do you get existing clients to adopt it versus new clients, including it in your minimum recommended stack? Can you give us some insight there?
Yeah. For my layered services in this year, in 24, I just built in FirmGuard as the base standard. It's at a price point to where I could easily roll that in, and as part of my annual price increase, it's just sucked up into that cost. When the client sees it or they ask about it, then I can then give them more information about, yeah, we are including this extra security package for you. Your machines support it. Why not take advantage of it? So for me, it's I liken it to the client doesn't really want to know how to make the sausage, just that it tastes good and that they can get it. So that's what I do for them. I provide them the security of the FirmGuard product.
I appreciate that. And that makes it easy, right? Because you're including it and then you're recovering the cost at some point, but you're doing it first because you're realizing better efficiency and protecting your client. And that's a very high value that you see in that relationship with your clients. Do you have a minimum required set of services that every client must adhere to in order to be your client or remain your client, Aaron?
Yes, I do. Of course, antivirus is the foundation, and then we build upon that with email security as well. From there, they can go on to a better and best program from us and get other services. But FirmGuard is the staple, along with antivirus and email security.
Yeah, well, attendees to today's webinar, if they've been on webinars with me before or know me, they know that I subscribe to the good, better, best philosophy, with the good being the absolute minimum. So I appreciate that perspective. Jesse, jump back over to you. From your position in really managing FirmGuard as part of your role and your team's role, if I were to ask you what your favorite feature is, if you had to pick one, what would that be?
Well, that was rough.
Sorry
I
to
think
put you on the spot.
no, I just blew into my mic. I blew some people's eardrums out. But I think Secure Config, for sure. It's the most unique of the features, and I think it's the main selling point for me if I were to be sold on FirmGuard again, because the amount of configuration that it brings to your desk has no competitor, really. Just not even like the tamper protection feature. That was something that wasn't even a feature of FirmGuard. It was just a feature that was there that was brought and made accessible to me through FirmGuard. So it's kind of a maximization tool to get into the hardware itself and get the most out of the hardware itself. And I enjoy getting the most out of my hardware like any other IT guy.
Appreciate that. All right. This has been great conversation. I want to get to more in-depth Q&A, but, Aaron, you mentioned that the product is so cost effective that it's almost a no-brainer. And I'd like to invite Amit back on now to talk to us a little bit about pricing and then lead us into some Q&A and how MSPs can engage with the FirmGuard product. Amit?
Yeah, so hopefully you can see the slide here. Pricing, very straightforward. So it begins at $2 per endpoint per month in small volume, 100 endpoints minimum. And then, as you'd expect, as you get higher in terms of number of endpoints that are utilized with FirmGuard, the price progressively goes down, down to as low as $1.50 per endpoint per month at 5,000. And if you're an MSP that's got over 5,000, please reach out to us and we'll definitely work with you. But believe it or not, we do have customers that are up there at the 5,000 range. So again, very, very simple pricing model.
For sure. And that's in aggregate, right? Across all clients. Is that how the pricing works?
That's correct. Yeah. So it doesn't matter how many clients you have, it's how many total endpoints you have under management, irrespective of the number of clients.
Right, right. I mean, from where I'm sitting, holy cow, just the ability to manage the BIOS remotely is just like, that's the win right there. And then having the all of the configuration exposed, like you, Jesse, I was very impressed when watching Rob go through the demo, and wow, there are features in here that I didn't even know existed, right? So let's get into a little bit of Q&A. And Amit, I'm going to ask you to bring up that one slide again to allow everybody to sign up now and get their free FirmGuard use for 14 days while we get into some Q&A. Oh, Rob, you were busy while we were chatting. They're answering a bunch of questions here. So from the questions you answered, Rob, which ones would, let's pick out a few and let's answer them live for everybody in case folks aren't tracking the Q&A. So which are the most interesting questions or ones that you typically get from the majority of MSPs, and how did you answer them?
Sure. So one that we got various questions is what happens if the PC doesn't boot after you make a change?
Mm-hmm.
So, again, we're basically offering you a way to edit the BIOS settings, change the BIOS settings, just like you were in front of the machine. So there may be some settings within the BIOS that may cause the machine to not boot. So, the technician does have to be careful. It's kind of like if you're using a saw, you want to make sure you don't cut your arm off, right? But it's still a very useful tool. So, however, what I can say is historically, I've only seen basically twice that I've had a customer complain that a machine didn't come back online. And we took that very, very seriously because that's obviously the whole reason why we have our allow list, to make sure that we understand how FirmGuard is going to interact with that BIOS and that we don't get any of these unexpected surprises. One of them was actually the machine was stuck on a press any key prompt. For whatever reason, that BIOS required a key at the post to continue booting. So someone did have to go and press a key and continue the boot process. The other one, coincidentally, it actually was a hardware failure that was completely unrelated. It just so happened to happen at the same time that they were playing around with FirmGuard and making changes and doing things like that. But it was completely, we also dug into that one and, found out that it wasn't something that FirmGuard had anything to do with, thankfully for us. But it was just a coincidence. But besides those times, really haven't seen something that, we've changed and now the machine just hasn't come back online because of a change that FirmGuard did. And like I said, the only thing I can think of is if you make a change that is obviously something that won't, if you change the boot order of the hard drives or something to that effect, obviously that's going to affect. So you do have to be careful with, what settings you're changing, just like you would be if you're in front of the machine making those changes.
Got it. So just quickly, I know we're almost at the top of the hour. I want to get a little more feedback from Aaron and Jesse, using it in the real world, as we say. So I'm going to ask the same question of both of you. So Aaron, first, do you have kind of a standard that you have now created because of having the ability to manage the BIOS and configuration through FirmGuard that you kind of deploy for every machine that your team manages? And how does that work? How do you come up with that standard?
Yeah, we do a lot of financial and construction clients, and regardless of whether they are financial or construction, just having the secure boot turned on, having BitLocker enabled, having those functions across the board is a quick and easy task, and also a report item that we can check off on for our clients. And then when we have our business reviews, we can produce reports that show these have been done, you're covered in these areas, and clients happy.
Thanks, Aaron. How about you, Jesse? Do you have different configs or different standards that you set up? And if so, how do you arrive at those?
Well, it is kind of a new frontier for standardization because BIOS was anything but standard before this. And now I have a tool that kind of hourglasses them in. One thing I'd like to start doing is understanding how Wake on LAN works and use it to our advantage to remotely troubleshoot machines while the customer is away, because you'll tell a customer, please leave it on. We'll do it after hours. And then it's not on whenever you get there. That would be something I'd like to eliminate using FirmGuard. And then other things like BIOS passwords seems like a very simple thing to do. You know, it's like, what do you mean you don't have a password? It's like, well, I got to get into the machine and do all this. It would be nice if I could just do that remotely, and now I can. So I'd like to start standardizing that. And now that I have a standard UI for that, I can actually build it into processes, and it'll be a lot less overhead to do that.
Appreciate that, Jesse. And I see a couple more chats here. Steven says, free hint, any client that is required to meet NIST SP 800-53 is required to monitor firmware. So, you know, this is where we are, everyone.
That
Hey,
is,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
could speak to that. That's the exact, I think we took the slide out to save time, but that was one thing that we solved with FirmGuard, was that specific requirement that he's talking about, the ability to monitor the versions and update them securely. That's something we accomplished with FirmGuard.
Awesome. Well, team, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank our attendees for spending 60 minutes working on the business with us today, rather than in the business. I'd like to thank Amit and Rob from Phoenix and introducing FirmGuard to us, Aaron from Phoenix, and Jesse as well for joining us. Thank you all, and really appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing, everybody.
Take care, Eric.
Take care. Bye-bye.